Hey friends, what up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Yutes, Daf 19 of Masechta Hagiga. Friends, today we're studying about Tumah and Tara. About, what if you didn't have Kavanah when you went to the mikveh? Does it work? Does it not work? Interesting stuff. I apologize for the background noise. I think my brother might be washing his belt buckle in the washing machine, or rocks or something. So I apologize for the background noise. I think it's almost done, but then what happens is once it's done it starts beeping, which is a little bit of a problem. So okay, but friends, we'll figure it out. We're gonna go weiter. So alright, so we're gonna start off Yud Ches on the base, about 5 lines from the bottom. Alright, so you have a fellow, he's washing his hands. Kol hakavod. Niskaven yodav tehoris, lo niskaven yodav temeis. Alright. So if he has kavanah, intention, to be washing his hands, well then they become pure. If he didn't have intention, I guess, to purify his hands when he's washing his hands, so then his hands remain impure. Alright, what do you want me to tell you? Similarly, a fellow who sticks his hands into 40 saw of a mikveh, right? He sticks his hands into the mikveh. The washing machine just stopped, which I think might mean it's gonna go into beeping mode in a minute, which means I gotta go turn it off. But after that, we should probably be distraction free until they come back to collect the belt buckle. Let's go weiter. So, alright. So, so back to the program. Oh, okay. It's right there. Similarly, a fellow who sticks his hands into a mikveh. So, niskaven yodav tehoris. So, if he has kavanah to purify his hands, then his hands become pure. Lo niskaven yodav temeis. And if he didn't have intention, so then his hands remain impure. But one second, we learn in a brisa, but friends, we have a brisa that says that whether he had intention, whether he didn't have intention, his hands are pure. Oy vavoy, friends, what do we do? On the one hand, we have a brisa saying that if you have kavanah, so then your hands are pure. If you don't have kavanah, if you don't have intention, so your hands remain impure. We have another brisa that says whether you have intention, whether you don't have intention, it works. Friends, what do we do? Rav Nachman lo kasha. Says Rav Nachman, don't worry about it. All good. Lo kasha kan l'chulin kan l'maiser. So it depends. Are we talking about chulin or are we talking about maiser sheni? Right? And just to clarify, in case it wasn't clear yesterday, whenever it's talking about Meiser over here, it's talking about Meiser Sheni. Friends, the washing machine is calling. I will be right back. Okay, I'm back. And the truth is, now I'm kind of curious if it was a belt buckle or if it was rocks. What do you guys think? Should we take a poll? Do you think my brother put a belt in the washing machine? Or do you think that he put rocks in the washing machine? Let us know on WhatsApp. Alright, let's go weiter. Fine. So whenever we say that Meiser right now, so we're talking about Meiser Sheni, right, as opposed to Meiser Rishon, right? We're not talking about the 10% of the field that goes to the Levi. We're talking about the 10% that you take to Jerusalem and eat there. So we're saying, so it depends, right? We learned about different levels of Tumah yesterday, right? We talked about Chulin, Meiser Sheni, Truma, Kodshim, Mechatos. So there's a distinction. So if we're talking about Chulin, so then whether you have kavanah, whether you don't have kavanah, it works. If we're talking about Meiser Sheni, so then you have to have kavanah. If you have kavanah, it works. If you don't have kavanah, it doesn't work. And how do I know that Chulin does not require kavanah? That even if you don't have intention, your hands become pure. The Tanan is bitaka learned in Mishnah Gal. A wave. Friends, you hear this? Push it. You're going to the beach, Alright? And there's a big wave. What's that called? Like that the surfers like to go in? A barrel wave or something like that? And there's Poshet, there's the roof of the wave, and then there's where it comes crashing down, the head of the wave. Maybe some of the Chevra in California can maybe give us more details, but we can use this as a basis. Anyway, so a wave. Gal shenitlosh. So you have poshet, a wave. V'arboyim soya, and the wave contains 40 sa. 40 sa, of course, is enough for a mikveh. V'nofal ala adam v'ala kelim, and the wave crashed down on humans and on a fellow, on vessels, tihorin. Well, they just got a mikveh treatment, right? Right? They didn't have to go to the mikveh came to them. Right there. Oh, that's nice. All of a sudden you look up, a mikveh crashes down on you. Pure, tahor, problem solved. Alright. So we're saying, Katani Adam Dumi de Kelim. So we mentioned in the same breath, people and vessels. So ma Kelim de lo michavne, af Adam de lo michaven. So just like vessels obviously don't have any kavanah, they're inanimate objects. So also we're saying that the fellow, also even though he didn't have any intention to become pure, he remains pure. Okay? What? I'm sorry, even though he didn't have any intention to become pure, he nonetheless becomes pure, right? Meaning just like the vessels don't have to have any intention, the fellow also doesn't have to have any intention, and he nonetheless remains pure. It's very cool. I mean, these Gemaras, for a long time already, we've been learning Masechtas that requires a different type of energy to study the pages, right? This already we have to work through slower. Maybe the Gemara is getting us ready for Yevamis, who knows? But it's just a different kind of experience. Like, yeah, you just gotta go slower, but the pages are smaller. It's like, you have Tainus and Megillah, Moed Katan, big pages. The content isn't necessarily as slow. You gotta move fast, especially if you plan to get through it in a timely manner. You gotta move on those big pages. Over here, there's less content, but, it's slower moving, which is kind of nice. I don't know. What do you guys think? I don't know. I feel like I'm more engaged with this kind of content. With the big pages, you gotta hustle, It's exhausting. But this, whatever, you work through. What do you want me to tell you? Let's go weiter. So, v'ala kelim tor, and fine. Katani adam to me the kelim. I'm repeating. Ma kelim to lo michavne, af adam to lo michavne. Umi mai. In fact, the Gemara, how do we know that is the correct conclusion? Dilma, perhaps. B'yoshev mitzapa imosa yitoli shagal askinon. That maybe it's talking about a situation where there was intention. Maybe this fellow was sitting there and waiting. When is the wave going to come crashing down on me because I have to become pure? So maybe he did have intention. And then we'll compare vessels to people. That just like the fellow has intention, has kavaneh, so also the vessels, right, you have intention that they should become pure. V'chitema biyoshev umitzape, and if you're going to suggest, but wait a second, if we're just saying that the fellow is sitting there waiting for the wave to come crashing down on him, so my lememra, so then what's the big deal? Right? Meaning, if you're going to suggest, why do I need to teach about that case? Okay, so you have a fellow, he intends to go to the mikveh, the wave comes crashing down on him, 40 sa, the mikveh comes to him, crash. He has intention to become pure. He becomes pure. Great. So it was a fancy mikveh. It was a wave. But still, what's the big chiddush? You have a fellow. He was impure. Wants to become pure. Essentially, he goes to the mikveh. Whether it's a pool, whether it's a wave, who cares? So what's the big chiddush? So Sakadati Chamina, I may have thought to say, Ligzor Dilma Osi Lemitbo Bechardalis Shel Gishomen. Well, I might think that, well, if you let him, if the wave counts as a mikveh, so then maybe I would say that a torrent of water, right? If you're on a mountain and like a torrent of water runs down, that would not work as a mikvah. So I might think, well, if a wave crashes down on me, that works. Well, then maybe also a torrent of water works. So I might think that it's a problem. So that is what we are learning, that if a wave comes crashing down on a fellow and he has intention to become pure, he does become pure, even though, maybe if it was a torrent, he would not become pure. Inami, or else, Nigzor Roshan Atu Kefin. Or we might think that, well, when we should say that when the wave comes crashing down on me, it should not work, because if the head of the wave comes crashing down on me, if I say that would work, then I might also think that the roof of the wave, right? If you think of a wave and it's like creating like a barrel or something, so then there's like a roof to it. And I might think that, if I stick up my hand or something and put a vessel in there, that would work. But it doesn't work, because you can't go to the mikveh and you can't purify something in the middle of the air. So therefore I might think that you would not be able to use the head of the wave, since you're not allowed to use the roof of the wave. So Kamash Malan, that is the chiddush in both of those cases, Ki'ilu, that we're not concerned about the torrent, we're not concerned about the roof either, and we're saying that if a wave comes crashing down on a fellow and it has 40 saw of water, so then he would become pure, but he would have to have intention. So then how do we know that you can that you can become pure even if you do not have intention? So, I'm sorry. So, Kamash Milan, Dilo Gazrinan. Fine, that we don't make any of these gezeres, and you can. Oh wow, there's actually a lot more here. I'm sorry. Fine. So, Kamash Milan, Dilo Gazrinan. Fine. So we don't make a gezerah against the wave, and if the wave comes down crashing down on you and you have intention to become pure, you become pure. Now, and how do we know that you're not allowed to become pure by the roof of the wave, that it would have to be the head of the wave that comes crashing down? And you Tanyas, we learn in a brayso, matbilin biroshin vein matbilin b'kefin, that you can go to the mikvah in the head of the wave. If it comes crashing down on you, that works, but it would not work if we're talking about the roof of the wave. Because we don't go to the mikvah in the, right, we don't tovel in midair, right? The roof is like suspended in midair. It's not resting on anything. And therefore, right, it's in midair, and that doesn't work. We don't go to the mikvah in midair. Alright, that's good to know. No going to the mikvah in midair. Very interesting stuff. Alright, Zeu. So now Zeu. Fine. So what did we see? So we saw that if a wave comes crashing down on you and it has 40 saw of water, it could work to purify you, but you would have to have intention to become pure. Now, Elameha. So then how do we know that you don't have to have intention? Fine. So that brisa, doesn't teach us necessarily that you do not have to have intention, right? Because we said that maybe he's talking about where Davka did have intention. So then how do we know that you don't have to have intention? Elameha. Ditnan. That which we learned in the Mishnah, Paris, if you have fruits, shenaflu l'soch amas hamoyim. Okay, so you have a stream of water, and some fruits fell into that stream. Ufashat misha yadav tmeis, unitalon yadav tehoris, uferis einon bichi yuton. Okay, so if you have fruits that fell into a stream of water, I'm going to read that again. Ufashat misha yadav tmeis. So now you have a fellow that his hands are tameh, all right, and he sticks his hands into the stream, unitalon, and he chapped the fruits out of the stream. Yadav tehoris uferis einon bichiyuton. So two things then happen, right? So you have a guy, you have fruits. The fruits fell into the water. You have a guy, his hands are tameh. Okay, he sticks his hands into the water in order to remove the fruits. So we say, Yadav tehoris, his hands now become tahor. Uferis einen b'chiyutan. However, at the same time, the fruits are not b'chiyutan. Who can tell me what that means? What's kiyuton? Kiyuton is how we learn, right? It says kiyuton. What does the pasuk say? It says v'chiyuton mayim al zera, that when water gets on a seed, v'nafal min nivlasum olav, and then nevela falls on it, tamei hulachim, it becomes tamei, right? So, we've learned this before, that in order for something to be able to become tamei, so it has to have come in contact with water, right? So if you have, let's say, wheat, and you harvest the wheat, and then a dead sheretz falls on the wheat remains tahor because no water has gotten on the wheat. It doesn't count when it's connected to the ground, right? It doesn't count that it got wet when it rained out and it was still growing. Meaning once you've detached it from the ground, if no water has gotten on it, so even if a dead sheretz falls on it, it remains tahor. Once it comes in contact with water, so then it is mukhshir l'kabel tumah. It is able to then subsequently become tamei, and if then a dead sheretz falls on it, it becomes tamei. So now, you have this fruit. The fruit fell into the water. So if it fell into the water, it becomes mukhshir l'kabel tumah. It becomes able to receive tumah. However, in order for it to be able to become tamei, it has to be beneficial to you, right? It has to be in the context of you getting benefit. Now, in this case where your hands are tamei, and you stuck your hands into the water simply to remove the fruit, but you didn't have any particular intention for any kind of benefit, so we're saying that his hands nonetheless become tahor, but the fruit is not considered mukhshir l'kabel tumah. Let's go weiter for a second. But if he specifically put his hands into the water in order to wash his hands, yadav tahoris, so then his hands are tahor, v'aperis harein b'chiyutan, and at this point the fruits are mukhshir l'kabel tumah because he got benefit from it, right? Meaning he put his hands into the water not simply to remove the fruit, but because he wanted to wash his hands. And since he wanted to wash his hands, he got benefit by putting his hands in the water, and therefore the fruits, which became wet in the context of him getting his benefit, so they become mukhshir l'kabel tumah. But in the first case, where he didn't have any particular intention, he just sticks his hands into the water to take out the fruit, so the fruit does not become mukhshir l'kabel tumah. But here's the important point, his hands, even though he did not have any intention, nonetheless become tahor. So we see that in order for putting your hands, right, for washing your hands to work, for hullin, you would not need to have any kavanah, as we saw in this brisa, right? He just stuck his hands to chaparine the fruit, and nonetheless, his hands become tahor, even though he didn't have any particular intention to become tahor. Alright. I feel like that's how you know that the Gemara is getting more intense, maybe, if I'm saying the word chaparine. I feel like chaparine is a word that kind of comes up a lot in the context of like intense Gemara, because you got to chaparine this, you got to chaparine that. Reuven chapsarine, Shimon chapsarine. Eisve, Rabba l'Rav Nachman. So now things are getting heated. So Rabba as a kasha to Rav Nachman. What did Rav Nachman say? Rav Nachman said, right, because we had started off the daf by saying that, one second, we have one brisa that says that you have to have kavanah. We have another brisa that says you don't have to have kavanah when you wash your hands. So Rav Nachman says no problem. You have to have kavanah if we're talking about Meiser Sheni. You don't have to have kavanah if we're talking about Chulin. Eisve Rabba Rav Nachman, Rabba as a kasha to Rav Nachman atova lechulin. If a fellow goes to the mikvah for with the intention for chulin, right? So he goes to the mikvah for chulin. He has the intention when he goes to the mikvah to be going to the mikvah for chulin. Osir l'maiser, well, then he's not allowed to consume meiser sheni because he didn't have intention for meiser sheni. The Gemara so Rabba wants to argue to Rav Nachman, huchzak in, right? So we're saying he specifically needs to have kavanah, and in that case it works for meiser lo, huchzak lo. But if he didn't have intention, I'm sorry, for chulin, right? Meaning we said huchzak in. If he specifically had intention for chulin, so then it works for chulin. Lo huchzak lo, implying that if he didn't have intention for chulin, then going to the going to the mikvah would not work for the chulin. Lo, no, that's not true. This is what the brisa is saying. Even though he had intention for chulin, it's only going to work for hullin. It won't work for meiser sheni. So, but if you didn't have any intention at all, it would still work for hullin. Continues the Gemara. Eisvei, again, Rabbi asked the kasha to Rav Nachman, Tovo v'lo huchzok, right? We saw in our Mishnah, right? That if a fellow goes to the mikvah, but he doesn't have any intention to become pure, ki'ilu lo tova. It's as if he did not go to the mikvah at all. So my lab, ki'ilu lo tova klal. That sounds like he didn't go to the mikvah at all, right? Ki'ilu, right? We're saying he went to the mikvah, he didn't have any intention. It's as if he didn't go to the mikvah at all. So we see that you actually do have to have kavanah, because they're saying that if you don't have kavanah, it doesn't count for anything. No, not true. Ki'ilu lo tova l'maiser aval tova l'chulin. So Rav Nachman says, no, that's not true. What it means is that if a person goes to the mikveh without any kavanah, so then it's as if he didn't go to the mikveh at all, vis-a-vis maiser sheni. But for chulin, it would work. Husavar dachi kamad chile. So Rabbah thought that Rav Nachman was just blowing him off. Right? I mean, Rabbah thought that when Rav Nachman said, no, it means that it doesn't work at all for Meiser Sheni, but it works for Chulin. Rabbah thought that Rav Nachman was just blowing him off. Nofak dok ve'ashkoch. He went out and he checked and he found Titanya Tova v'lo huchzok, that if a person went to the mikveh and didn't have any kavanah to become tahor, Osir l'maiser umuter l'chulin, so he's not allowed to partake in maiser sheni, but he is allowed to. It works for chulin. So we see. So we see that taka going to the mikveh without kavanah would work for chulin. Amar Belazar, says Belazar, toval ve'olo. So you have a fellow. He goes to the mikveh. And he goes out of the mikveh. Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem. It's very good. Go into the mikveh, go out of the mikveh. Machzik atzmo l'chol ma sheyirtzeh. So at that point, he could have kavanah for anything that he wants. Okay, so Belazar says that a fellow goes to the mikveh, and he didn't have any particular kavanah when he went to the mikveh, but then afterwards, he can have kavanah for whatever he wants. Whatever, he can retroactively have kavanah once he gets out of the mikveh. Meisveh, we have a kasha. Odeyu raglo achaz bamoyim. We have a brisa that says that, one second, if he still has one leg in the water, that he hasn't completely left the water, huchzok lidover kal machzik atzmo lidover chomer. Well, in that case, let's say he went to the mikveh, and his intention was for chulin. And he didn't entirely leave the mikveh yet. He still had one foot in. And he says, you know what? Actually, rather scratch the chulin thing. Let's bump it up a notch. Let's kick it up a notch. I want to go to the mikveh for meiser sheni also. So that's fine. Right again. Odeu raglu achas b'mayim. If he still has one foot in the water, huchzok l'davar akal machzik atzmo l'davar chomer. Well, then even if he had intention for something more lenient initially, like chulin, he could still change his mind at that point that he actually has intention for something more stringent like meiser sheni. Allah, but once he gets out of the mikveh, shuv eno machzik, well, at that point it's too late. At that point it's too late. You can't have any kavanah after the fact. My lab, eno machzik klal. So that sounds like once you get out of the mikveh, so you can't, it's too late. You can't have any kavanah. So how could Rabbi Elazar say that when he goes to the mikveh, he gets out of the mikveh, he could then have the kavanah? We seem to be saying that, look, if you still have one foot in the mikveh, so fine, you could change your mind. But once you get out of the mikveh, you can't have any kavanah at that point. That's what the Brisa seems to be saying. Lo, the Gemara says no. Odeyu, that if he's still got a foot in the mikveh, so af al pisha huchzok machzik, so even though he initially had kavanah for something more lenient, he could then change his mind to be for something more stringent. But once he gets out of the mikveh, imlo huchzok machzik, so once he gets out of the mikveh, so now it depends. If he did not have any kavanah at all when he was in the mikveh, like Rabbi Elazar is saying, machzik, well then after the fact he can have kavanah and change that. V'im huchzok eno machzik. But if he had kavanah for something more lenient, so then he cannot change it to have kavanah for something more stringent. So, we see that in a situation where he went into the mikvah, so Rabbi Elazar is saying, in a situation where he went into the mikvah, and he did not have any kavanah at all to become Torah for anything, well then when he gets out of the mikvah, he can retroactively say, you know what, I want that tefillah to work for Truma. Now, if he went into the mikvah and he had kavanah for, let's say, hullin, so then, if he still has at least a foot in the mikvah, so then he could change his mind for Meiser Sheni, Truma, whatever it is. Once he gets out of that mikvah, if he had kavanah for hullin, well then he can no longer change his mind for it to be, let's say, for Meiser Sheni. Right, then it's too late. So again, if he didn't have any kavanah at all, he could change it after the fact. If he had kavanah for already something in the mikvah, so then he cannot change it after the fact. He can only change it while he at least still has 1 foot in the water. Friends, this is really fun stuff. Let's go weiter. Man Tana. So who is the Tana who says the following? Friends, you listening? Odeu raglo achaz b'moyim. So if he still has 1 foot in the mikveh, So man Tana odeu raglo achaz b'moyim. Right. So who is the Tana who says that that as long as he still has 1 foot in the mikvah, so he could change his mind? So Omer Pedas Rabbi Yehuda says Rabbi Pedas. Well, that would be Rabbi Yehuda the Tananis we learn in the Mishnah. Mikveh or mikveh shenimdad, it was measured. Okay. V'yesh ba'arbayim soya mechuvanos, and there's exactly 40 soya, exactly the measurement of a mikvah. V'yardu shnayim, and 2 people. Okay, 2 people went into that mikveh. All right. V'tavlu zeh achar zeh. Okay, one at a time. Which, for people who are kind of involved in the mikveh culture, you'll know that you can get a bunch of people in the mikveh l'maaseh. You can get a bunch of people in the mikveh l'maaseh. You can get a bunch of people in the mikveh l'maaseh. You can get a bunch of people in there. So says the Gemara. So says the Mishnah. So you have a mikveh, and it's 40 saya bidiyuk, bul. V'yardu shnayim, and 2 fellows went. V'tavlu zeh achar zeh, and they went to the mikveh first. Ruvain went, then Shimon went. Right? Ruvain went first, Shimon went second. Now, Harishin Tahor v'Hasheni Tamei. Ruvain is Tahor, Shimon remains Tamei, because, the mikveh was exactly 40 saw. Once Ruvain goes into the mikveh and then leaves the mikveh, and taking with him some of the water from the mikveh, his hair gets wet, whatever it is, he's taking some of the water with him. So now there's no longer 40 saw in the mikveh. By the time Shimon goes, it's no longer a kosher mikveh, because the minimum amount of water in a mikveh, as we've learned a few times, is 40 soya. Omar, Rabbi Yehuda, says Rabbi Yehuda, Im hoya raglav shel rishin no goes b'moyim. But if Ruvain's feet, right, if his foot was still touching the water, afasheni tar, then even the second fellow remains tahor. So we see that Rabbi Yehuda is mentioning this concept of your foot still being in the water. Amr of Nachman, Amr Rabbi bar Avua. Now says Rav Nachman in the name of his Rabbi Rabbi bar Avua in explaining this Mishnah, Machlokas b'mailos d'Rabbanan, that the machlokas over here is specifically by the by Tumah d'Rabbanan. By Tumah d'Rabbanan, right? There are certain Tumas that are d'Rabbanan. So for example, right, you have Epis, Azav on his 7th day. He goes to the mikvah on day 7, and then he waits till the night. But at that point, Midor he's already Torah, right? Can eat Truma already? He's already Torah. However, Midor we say that he can't eat Kodshim until he goes to the mikvah the next day. So that's an example of Tumah d'Rabbanan, right? So, says Rav Nachman and Rabbi bar Avua that Reb Yehuda and the Chachamim argue by Tumah Mid'Rabbanan. By Tumah Mid'Rabbanan. That Reb Yehuda says that as long as there's 1 foot in the mikvah, then, Shimon is tahor. The rabbis say no, even by Tumah D'Rabbanan, it does, Shimon is going to be Tameh. Aval mituma l'tayra tivrakol hasheni Tameh. But we're talking about Tuma Mida Oraisa, right? When a person is Tuma Mida Oraisa and he needs to become Tahor, so then even Rabbi Yehuda would say that, it doesn't matter if Reuven's foot is still in the mikvah, Shimon would be Tameh. V'hainu direb Pidas. And this is like Reb Pidas said, right? What did Reb Pidas say? Reb Pidas had said that what was it, a brisa, right? That brisa that says that if you have a fellow who is in the mikveh and he had intention for hullin, so as long as one foot is still in the mikveh, he could then change his mind that it should be for Meiser Sheni, right? So we said that is specifically the opinion of Reb Pidas said that's specifically the opinion of Reb Yehuda. Now, this whole concept of chulin and Meiser Sheni and Truma, like these levels of like one thing sort of being on a higher level than the next, is all Midaraban, right? Midaraisa, things are either Tameh or things are Tahor. But the concept of, Meiser Sheni being more sort of stringent than chulin and Truma being more stringent than Meiser Sheni, this whole hierarchy is Midaraban. And therefore, so Reb Pidas is saying that this brisa that says that, well, if you had kavanah for chulin, so then, as long as one foot's in the water, he could change his mind for Meiser Sheni. That whole hierarchy is Midir Abanon. And Reb Pidas is saying that that's specifically Reb Yehuda's opinion. So, and now we're saying that if you have Reuven and Shimon went into the mikvah that was exactly for what he saw, and then we're saying that as long as Reuven's foot is still in the mikvah, so then Shimon is tahor, and we're saying that says Rav Nachman, the name of Rabba Baravua, that the rabbis are arguing on Rabbi Yehuda even by Dirabbanans, which means that the rabbis say that Shimon remains Tameh even if Reuven's foot is still in the water, and Rabbi Yehuda says no, as long as Reuven's foot is still in the water, Shimon is tahor. So we see that Rabbi Yehuda, in the context of Dirabbanans, is saying that 1 foot in the water makes a difference, but the rabbis argue and say that it doesn't work. So that's just like Rabbi Pidas was saying, that concept of the foot in the water by Dirabbanans is specifically the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. However, there are those who say, Omer of Nachman, Omer Rabba Baravua, Machlokes mituma l'tayra, that the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis is actually even by Mida Oraisas, by Tuma de Oraisa, that Rabbi Yehuda is still saying and maintaining that if he has 1 foot in the water, then Shimon remains, that Shimon becomes tahor. But by Dirabbanans, even the rabbis would agree, like with Rabbi Yehuda, that as long as there's still a foot in the water, as long as Reuven still has a foot in the water, so then Shimon would be able to would be tahor, or So in that case, if we're saying that by Dirabbanans, Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim agree, well, in that case, when it comes to this, a fellow going to the mikvah and having kavanah for chulin, and we're saying if he still has 1 foot in the water, he could still have kavanah, change it to have kavanah for Meiser Sheni. Well, that's talking about, right, these different levels which are Dirabbanan, and we're saying that if by Dirabbanans the rabbis agree with Rabbi Yehuda that the foot in the water counts. Well, in that case, the brisa, which talks about a fellow going into the mikvah and still having his foot in the water, he could change his mind, so that could also be the rabbis as well, not just Rabbi Yehuda. And ufliga de Rabbi Pidas, then that of course would argue on Rabbi Pidas, because Rabbi Pidas says that brisa, which talks about the guy who goes to the mikvah and changing his kavanah, that Rabbi Pidas said that's specifically Rabbi Yehuda. But if we say like this Ika da Amri of Rav Nachman or Rav Baravua, that the rabbis would agree with Rabbi Yehuda by Dirabbanans, so then it could even be the rabbis, and that would argue on Reb Pidas. Amar Ula says Ula, Ba'imine mi Reb Yochanan. Ula says that he asked Reb Yochanan. What did he ask Reb Yochanan? The Reb Yehuda, Ma'u lahatbil machtin v'tzinorius birosho shel rishon. Friends, do you hear this shaila? I will read it again. Ula asked Reb Yochanan, the Reb Yehuda, according to Reb Yehuda, who said that as long as you have 1 foot in the water, so then Shimon, right, as long as Reuven still has 1 foot in the water, then Shimon would be tahor, he'd be able to use that mikvah. So how come? Well, friends, we learned Masechta Eruvin. We learned about good achis, right? A wall going down. So we wanted to say, good achis is a halacha by mechitzis, so I'm not exactly sure how good achis would apply here. But anyways, the idea here is that you have, right, Ruvain gets out of the mikveh. He's got some water on him. And we're going to say that according to Rabbi Yehuda, we could view it as though the water goes straight down back into the mikveh, and the water is still in the mikveh. And because we say good achis, so we view it as if the water is still in the mikveh. And when Shimon therefore goes into the mikveh, he's going into a full mikveh, even though there's water on Ruvain's body. But because he still has 1 foot in the water, we view it as if the water on Ruvain's body goes straight back down into the mikveh, and you got a full mikveh, and Shimon is going to the mikveh in a full mikveh. So that's good achis. Now, of course, we know that the opposite, the inverse, is good asik, a wall going up. So now, so Ula asks Rabbi Yochanan, and he says, look, clearly Rabbi Yehuda says good achis, that, we can view it as if the water goes down into the mikveh. But now, ma'u lahat bil machten v'tzinorius. What if you want to be tovel needles and spinning forks, birosho shel rishon, on the head of Reuven? You hear that? Reuven goes to the mikveh, and now he's still got a foot in the mikveh, and his hair is wet, and now you want to take some needles and little forks and stuff and put it on Reuven's head. Do we say that the water of the mikveh goes up to his head, and now it's like we're putting the needles and stuff in the mikveh waters? So good achis islay Rabbi Yehuda, good asik leislay. Do we say that while Rabbi Yehuda holds of good achis that the water goes down to the mikveh, maybe he does not hold that the water of the mikveh would go up to the needles? Or Dilma, or perhaps good asik nami islay, maybe in addition to good achis, he also holds of good asik, and you'd be able to put the needles on his head and have them become pure that way. Omerle, Yochanan says, Tnisua, what we learn in a brayso, Shalosh gamomius benochal. Alright, you have like a canyon or something, and there's like I don't know, mountains going down to the canyon, and in the mountain there are like 3 like holes or whatever in the mountain where water can accumulate. Alright, so imagine going down the mountain, so you have one at the bottom, 3 of these holes. One is the lowest one, one's the middle one, one's the top one. So you have an upper hole, a middle hole, and a lower hole. The upper hole and the lower hole each contain 20 soya of water, which is half the amount necessary for a mikvah. But the middle hole can contain 40 saya of water. Okay, so now, and now there is a torrent of water that sort of is passing through all 3 of them. That sort of makes, in a sense, like a connection for all 3 of them. So now, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, says Rabbi Yehuda, Meir hayo Omer, that Rabbi Meir would say, Mat bilbel yon, that you could nonetheless go to the mikvah in the upper mikvah, right? Matbel bel yona, you can go to the mikvah in the upper hole, right? And the chiddush being that the upper hole only has 20 sa, which is too small. But apparently, Reb Meir seems to be saying that we could say good asik, that while the middle hole has 40 sa, which is a kosher mikvah, and we could say that good asik, that it goes up to the upper hole, and even though the upper hole only has 20 sa, we could view it as if the waters, the 40 sa from the middle hole kind of went up to the upper hole, and you can even go to the mikveh in the upper hole. And the implication being that if Rabbi Yehuda says that he's quoting Reb Meir as saying that you can go to the mikveh in the upper one, so the assumption being that Reb Yehuda agrees with Reb Meir, and therefore Reb Yehuda would say that we would say good asik as well, and that is essentially how Reb Meir is answering Ula's question, that yes, we would say good asik. V'atanya. But then Ula asks Rabbi Yochanan, but don't we learn in a brayso, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Meir hayo Omer mat b'bel yona, that Rabbi Meir would say that you can go to the mikveh in the upper hole, Vani Omer b'tachtona, v'lo be'elyona. But I, Rabbi Yehuda, say that you can go to the mikveh in the lower one because we would say good achis, v'lo be'elyona, but not in the upper one because we would not say good asik. So according to this brisa, it's pretty clear that Rabbi Yehuda holds only of good achis, not of good asik. Amle Tanya, and Rabbi Yochanan replies, well, if there's a brisa, there's a brisa. Can't argue with the brisa. If the brisa says that Rabbi Yehuda says that we say good achis but not good asik, well then that is that. Continues the Mishnah, Hatova lechulin v'huchzok lechulin v'chulei. So we said that if a fellow goes to the mikvah and he has intention for hullin, so then it works for hullin, it does not work for meiser sheni. Now, Mani Masnisen, who is the author of our Mishnah that seems to be saying that making a differentiation between hullin and meiser, right? Because after all, we saw yesterday in a brisa that Rabbi Yehuda, that Rabbi Meir seems to be saying that you don't need to wash your hands for hullin or for meiser, for meiser sheni, right? So Rabbi Meir seems to be making no distinction between hullin or meiser sheni, but the rabbis said that by meiser sheni it would be asur, right? You would have to wash your hands for meiser sheni. So Mani Masnisen. So who is the author of our Mishnah who is saying that if you wash your hands for chulin, if you go to the mikvah for chulin, it doesn't work for meiser sheni? So Rabbanani d'shanilu bein chulin and meiser. So that must be the rabbis who distinguish between chulin and meiser sheni. But ema seifa. But let me ask you a kasha. If we continue in the Mishnah, what does it say? Bigdi ama oretz midras lefrushin, that the clothing, the garments of an ama oretz are tamei, for somebody who's makpid to eat chulin in a state of purity. Bigdei prushin midras lochle truma, and the garments of a prushin, somebody who's makpid to eat chulin in a pure state, so his garments are considered tamei relative to somebody, right? For somebody who like a kohen who needs to make sure that he's eating truma in a state of purity. So we see that in the seifa we go straight from prushin, who are makbid on chulin, to people who are makbid on truma. We skip a step, i.e., we don't differentiate between chulin and meiser sheni. So under Reb Meir, so that sounds like Reb Meir, that he treats chulin and meiser sheni the same. Reish Rabbanan v'sefer Reb Meir. So we're saying that the first part of the Mishnah is the rabbis who are distinguishing between chulin and meiser sheni, and the second part of the Mishnah is Reb Meir who doesn't distinguish. So in Reish Rabbanan v'sefer Reb Meir, that's correct. The first part of the Mishnah is the rabbis. The second part of the Mishnah is Reb Meir. Rav Acha bar Ada masni la b'seifa chomesh mailos umukila kula k'Rabbanan. Whereas Rav Acha bar Ada says actually there's an additional step in the last part of the Mishnah, right? When it says that the garments of Amma Oretz is considered midras for a prushin. There's additionally, for the prushin is midras for somebody who's makbiti meiser sheni in Tyra, and then for meiser sheni we then go to truma. So therefore, the entire Mishnah therefore is the rabbis who distinguish between chulin and meiser sheni. Friends, that was a few tests of Masechta Hagiga. Wow, that was a packed daf. I mean, that Amud Beis was like pretty small, but that Amud Aleph took us like basically the whole time. So the first part of the daf we talked about that you don't have to have kavana when you are purifying yourself for chulin. That whether you have kavana, whether you do not have kavana, it works. Rabbi Elazar had an interesting opinion, which is if you go to the mikvah without any particular intention, well then when you leave the mikvah, you can have whatever intention you want after the fact. Now we then saw a brisa from which we learned that, but if when you were in the mikvah you did have intention, well then, if you still have a foot in the mikvah, you can kind of upgrade your intention as long as you still have your foot in the mikvah. But once you then get out of the mikvah, you're stuck with whatever intention you had when you were in the mikvah. We then saw machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis regarding somebody, right, there was an exact mikvah, it was exactly 40 saw, then Reuven and Shimon both went into the mikvah, so the rabbi said Shimon is tameh. Rabbi Yehuda said that Reuven Right, I'm sorry, the rabbi said Shimon is Tameh. Rabbi Yehuda says that as long as Reuven's foot is still in the mikvah, so then Shimon is Tahor. And we had two ways of understanding this machlokas. One is that the machlokas is by Derabanan, Tumah Derabanan, but by Tumah Deraisa, even Rabbi Yehuda would admit that even if Reuven's foot is still in the mikvah, it does not work. The other way to understand it is that specifically that machlokas is even by Tumah Deraisa, but by Tumah Derabanan, everyone would agree that if Reuven still has his foot in the mikvah, then it works for that Shimon is tahor. We then asked a question about we saw machlokas between Reb Meir and Rabbi Yehuda about do we say good asik when it comes to the waters of a mikvah. One nafkamina being, for example, if you have 3 holes filled with water on a mountain and the middle one is 40 sa is a kosher mikvah, and then the top and the bottom ones are not kosher mikvahs, can we say good asik to say that it's like the kosher one, top one is kosher as well? Reb Meir says yes, and Reb Yehuda says no. Friends, that was the Daf Yud Ches of Masechta Hagiga. I hope you enjoyed. Peace out.